The businessman believed his son's skin color didn't match his legacy and status. Without hesitation, he signed the divorce papers and left her behind, struggling alone with the baby. 3 years later, she appears again, but now she's the millionaire threatening to swallow his company. And what was once contempt will turn into regret in the face of the power she has gained. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel and let's get started. Clarice lay in her hospital bed, exhausted yet filled with a fragile kind of wonder at the 2 tiny bundles resting against her chest. The steady hum of fluorescent lights overhead made the room feel oddly serene, but in her heart, a whirlpool of uncertainty swirled. She could already sense Bradley's presence in the corridor, his expensive shoes tapping across the sterile floor as he approached. He paused in the doorway, gaze heavy with disapproval. Wearing a tailored suit far too formal for a hospital visit, Bradley looked more like a stern executive than a new father. Clarice studied his expression, hoping in vain for even a flicker of pride or tenderness. But there was none. Instead, his eyes darted to the small, dark-haired heads resting on her arms. When he finally stepped inside, the distance between them felt colder than the air-conditioned space. "They don't look like me," Bradley said, his voice clipped. The words echoed too loudly in the cramped hospital room. A nurse who'd been checking the baby's vitals paused, startled, and tried to busy herself with the IV stand. Clarice felt her chest tighten. "They are your children," she managed in a soft voice. "Can't you even hold them once?" He shook his head, mouth twisting into a sneer. "Don't be dramatic. You know exactly how this will look to my investors. I need a perfect image, Clarice. This is not what I signed up for." A wave of exhaustion and anger crashed through her. She had only given birth yesterday, her entire body sore and drained. Yet the real pain now came from his utter lack of empathy. Her mind reeled. This was the man she married in love, who had once promised her the world. He was the same person now speaking of their newborn twins like they were strangers intruding on his life. A nurse poked her head into the room, cautious eyes darting between them. She offered a thin smile meant to soothe the tension. "Clarice, do you need anything for the pain? Or maybe some water?" Clarice forced a polite nod. "Water would be nice. Thank you." The nurse left, leaving the door slightly ajar so the staff could keep an ear out in case something escalated. Bradley took a small stack of papers from his briefcase and all but flung them onto the edge of her bed. "I've had my lawyer draft these. It's best we finalize things swiftly." She stared, uncomprehending for a moment. Then realization tightened around her like a vice. "Divorce papers," she whispered, feeling tears threaten to well up. "Here? Now?" "Better to be done with it," he said, voice hard. "I'll arrange for you to move out of the penthouse. My team will ensure you have a few days to clear your belongings." "You can't do this," she said, voice cracking. "I just gave birth to your children. We're supposed to be a family." He scoffed. "A family? Look at them." His eyes flicked to the tiny, swaddled infants. "And look at you. This is going to tarnish my entire reputation. There's a reason I needed someone who could uphold my image. Now I'm stuck in scandal." A lump clogged Clarice's throat, half fury and half heartbreak. She gently smoothed a hand over one baby's cheek, marveling at how perfect they were, so small, yet so precious. The notion that their father saw them as some kind of public relations liability filled her with a raw rage she didn't know she possessed. "Why won't you even give them a chance?" she asked, her voice trembling with equal parts despair and indignation. "They're your flesh and blood, Bradley." He ignored the question, pivoting toward the door as if her words were inconsequential. Then, he turned back with a pointed glare. "I've spoken with our PR consultants. We'll spin this as infidelity on your part. Let the world think these children aren't mine. It'll shield me from fallout." Clarice's friend, a soft-spoken woman who had come to check on her, walked in at that moment. She'd overheard just enough to shoot Bradley a furious look. "You're out of line!" she hissed, but Bradley was already pushing past her to stride into the corridor. She hurried to Clarice's side, wrapping an arm around her trembling shoulders. "Don't listen to him," she murmured, concern etched on her face. "He's in the wrong. Anyone with half a heart can see that." Outside in the hallway, Bradley's voice escalated as he argued with a passing doctor. "She needs to be discharged immediately," he barked, loud enough for Clarice to hear. The friend and nurse exchanged uneasy glances, uncertain how best to protect Clarice from this public humiliation. Swallowing her tears, Clarice turned inward for strength. She held one baby in each arm, pressing their warm bodies close. "I won't let him treat them like they're nothing," she whispered. A spark of determination flared within her. No matter how blindsided she felt by his cruelty, she had to stay strong for the twins. A few hours later, she found herself being wheeled out to the hospital's exit by a kindly older nurse who said little but offered comforting pats on Clarice's shoulder. Bradley trailed behind, speaking in hushed, angry tones on his phone. He ended the call with a cold command. "Have her personal access revoked. I want her out by the end of today." Clarice, lips trembling, tried to stand as steadily as she could once they reached the entrance. The automatic doors parted, letting in a rush of outside air that smelled of asphalt and distant car exhaust. She clutched the babies tighter, 1,000 questions racing through her mind. Where would they go? How would she pay for things? And would Bradley really push the divorce through so heartlessly? He stepped in front of her, lowering his phone, eyes narrowed. "You have until tomorrow to collect your things. The penthouse staff will hand over your belongings. After that, you're on your own." A cluster of medical staff hovered nearby, too discreet to interrupt but too sympathetic to walk away entirely. Her friend hovered behind Clarice, ready to help at a moment's notice. At that instant, everything froze. The bright overhead sun in the glass doorway, the swirl of people, and the faint beep of hospital machines in the background. Clarice fought down a surge of panic. The exhaustion of childbirth weighed on her body, but the fury at Bradley's words kept her upright. She felt his icy stare drilling into her. "I'll give you one piece of advice," he said, voice barely above a hiss. "Don't try to drag my name through the mud, or you'll regret it." Despite the fear fluttering in her stomach, Clarice lifted her chin. "They're your children," she said firmly. "You don't get to pretend they don't exist just because it doesn't fit your precious image." His lip curled. "Watch me," he said. Then he turned on his heel, shoulders rigid, and stormed toward a sleek town car waiting by the curb. Trembling, Clarice exhaled a shaky breath. She felt the babies shift in her arms, mewling softly, as if sensing her distress. Her friend gently touched her elbow. "Let's get you home. My home for now," the friend offered. "We'll figure out the rest later." Nodding, Clarice blinked back tears. Somewhere, behind her despair, an ember of fierce determination sparked. She thought of the life she wanted to give her twins, the safety and love they deserved, and she vowed that Bradley's cruelty wouldn't destroy them. As they moved away from the hospital doors, she didn't look back. Bradley's final threat still echoed in her ears, but her grip on the babies only tightened. If he believed she'd crumble in the face of scandal and intimidation, he didn't know her nearly as well as he thought. And so, at that point of deep heartbreak, something else was born within her. The will to fight. She would protect these children. She would build a future for them, one that didn't hinge on Bradley's approval or resources. Step by step, she would find her footing and forge a path toward independence, even if she had to do it with little more than her own determination and the unwavering love she had for her twins. Bradley storms out, declaring he'll destroy her reputation if she dares to fight back. Clarice holds her newborns, her tears drying on her cheeks as she whispers, "I won't let him break us." Clarice stood on the sidewalk in front of the towering building, her heart pounding in her chest. The sky had turned a bruised shade of gray, hinting at rain, and the street lamps were already flickering to life. She carefully shifted one of the babies in her arms, scanning the side of the front entrance for the electronic keycard panel. But when she waved her card, the panel simply flashed red. She tried again, breath catching in her throat. Nothing. A single tear slid down her cheek, more from frustration than anything else. A doorman in a crisp uniform hurried over, looking uncomfortable as he recognized her. "I'm sorry, Miss Clarice," he muttered, gaze sliding away. "But Mr. Bradley instructed us that you're no longer authorized to enter the premises." The second twin stirred, a tiny whimper sounding through the hush of the evening. Clarice blinked back her tears, forcing calm into her voice. "This was my home," she said softly. "I live here." Her chest felt painfully tight as she clutched the babies closer. The doorman spread his hands in an apologetic gesture, torn between compassion and duty. "I'm sorry," he repeated, "but my instructions are clear." Clarice took a deep breath. She was too drained to argue, both physically and emotionally. A few days ago, she'd have marched in with her chin high, confronting anyone who tried to stand in her way. But her world had collapsed so quickly since the twins were born that it felt like every ounce of strength was locked away, replaced by a hollow pit of fear. The doorman held out a small black duffel bag. "Security packed a few of your things," he said, his face showing genuine regret. "That's all we could gather on short notice." She stared at the bag, feeling her cheeks burn with shame. Was this really how her marriage ended? Being shut out like a stranger? The babies fussed in her arms and she had to shift one higher against her shoulder. "Thank you," she managed, her words trembling. As she turned away, a rumble of thunder rolled through the sky. She walked a few paces down the street, feeling dazed and near tears. A single car whooshed by, headlights glaring in the growing darkness. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and for a mad second she hoped it might be Bradley, calling to apologize. But she immediately dismissed that thought. Even if he did call, any tenderness he once had for her seemed long gone. She pulled out the phone. It was her friend, Tanya, the one who had stood by her side in the hospital. "Where are you?" came the worried voice. "I'm nearly there." Clarice let out a shaky breath. "I'm out front. He changed the locks on me." Tanya's gasp on the other end was audible over the faint crackle of the line. "Stay where you are. I'm parking." Moments later, Tanya's small, beat-up sedan pulled up to the curb and she hopped out. Her eyes swept over Clarice, the babies, and the duffel bag, and she didn't bother hiding her outrage. "Unbelievable," she muttered, helping Clarice slip into the back seat. "You're coming to my place. We'll sort everything out later." They drove through the city, the streets slick with a light drizzle. Neon signs glowed along the boulevard, throwing a kaleidoscope of colors across the windshield. Clarice found herself fighting back an onslaught of tears. She couldn't believe how drastically her life had changed. 1 week ago, she was Bradley's wife, living in a luxurious penthouse, dreaming of the moment her children would be born into a warm, stable home. Now, that world had shattered, leaving her to gather the pieces however she could. Tanya's apartment building was modest, with chipped paint on the hallways and a single elevator that groaned whenever it moved. But inside her unit, it felt surprisingly cozy. Warm lamps cast a soft glow against walls lined with old photos and mismatched bookshelves. Tanya ushered Clarice to a small guest room, where a foldable crib had already been set up in a corner. "Sorry it's cramped," Tanya said, hooking her thumbs into her jeans pockets with a sheepish look. "I just hope it helps, at least until you can figure out your next steps." Clarice's chest constricted with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. I'm so overwhelmed. The babies, the hospital bills, the divorce. I don't even know where to start." Tanya gave her a gentle hug. "We'll figure it out, one piece at a time." Those words washed over Clarice like a balm. She rocked the twins, singing a soft lullaby under her breath, and eventually settled them into the small crib. When they finally dozed off, Her head felt heavy with exhaustion. Tanya brought in a warm mug of tea and set it on a little side table next to the bed. "Thank you," Clarice murmured again, feeling like she couldn't say it enough. There was no telling how long she'd be under her friend's roof, but for now, this was sanctuary. Night fell, and Clarice found it impossible to sleep. Her phone buzzed repeatedly with notifications, text messages, missed calls, and social media pings. She scrolled through them and felt her stomach knot. Bradley's side of the story had started circulating online. Posts hinted at some unproven infidelity, painting Clarice as the unfaithful wife who duped a high-profile CEO. There were ugly comments calling her a gold digger, others accusing her of baby-trapping a wealthy man. Her eyes burned with tears, but she refused to look away. She needed to see what she was up against. When the twins woke for their midnight feeding, Clarice moved automatically, feeding one while rocking the other. Even in the worst night of her life, their small faces brought her a sense of calm. She settled back into the single bed and closed her eyes, determined to push all those hateful rumors aside for just a few minutes of rest. But rest wouldn't come easily. By first light, her mind was already racing with a plan. She couldn't rely on Bradley's wealth or name anymore, and she refused to let the toxic rumors define her. Carefully, she rummaged through the duffel bag, finding nothing but some spare clothes and an old notebook. She opened the worn pages, recalling a half-formed business idea she'd sketched out months ago. It was something about bridging financial tools with emerging technology, an idea that came to her while visiting one of Bradley's corporate events. Back then, it had felt like a curiosity, a side note in a life overshadowed by his interests. Now, it felt like a lifeline. Daylight crept through the blinds and she heard Tanya bustling in the kitchen. Eager to do something productive, Clarice joined her, the twins dozing in a portable bassinet on the living room sofa. "You're up early," Tanya said, noticing the notebook under Clarice's arm. "I want to see if I can turn this into something real," Clarice said softly. "A business plan. Maybe a startup. If I can make it work, I can provide for the babies without Bradley's money." Tanya arched an eyebrow. "You just gave birth. Take it easy on yourself." Clarice smiled, though her eyes were shadowed by sleeplessness. "I know, but I can't lie down and let him bully me. I won't." Over the next few days, she juggled newborn care with timid stabs at her laptop, writing rough outlines for a potential startup. She felt a surge of timid excitement, but also pangs of anxiety. Where would the funding come from? Her bank account had taken a hit from medical bills, and everything about her future felt so uncertain. Late one afternoon, Tanya handed her a stack of mail. "Some of these came to my address," she said, shaking her head. "I guess Bradley forwarded your mail this way, or maybe it's just coincidence." Clarice sorted through envelopes that contained random bills and junk advertisements. Suddenly, she froze at the sight of an official-looking letter. The return address read, "Law Offices of Harper and Reese." Her hand tensed involuntarily. She set aside the rest of the mail and tore the envelope open. Her eyes locked on the bold text, "Summons for a paternity dispute." The words seemed to leap off the page, delivering a blow she hadn't fully expected, despite Bradley's threats. Her stomach twisted as she read the lines. He was contesting the children's legitimacy in court, determined to prove these babies weren't his. Her pulse hammered in her ears. Despair fought with anger, but as she let out a long, shaky breath, anger won. He was going to drag her through a legal nightmare, tarnishing her name even further and risking the emotional well-being of their newborns, who hadn't asked for any of this. Yet somehow, underneath the rage, she felt a familiar resolve stirring again. She'd already vowed to protect her children at all costs. This was just another battle she'd have to face. A small crinkle of the letter echoed in the silent living room. She clenched it tight in her fist, pain flaring in her chest. Tanya came over, concern etched on her face. "What is it? Clarice?" Clarice forced herself to exhale slowly. She raised her eyes, determination spilling through them. "He wants a paternity dispute," she said, voice tight. "He's really doing this." Then her gaze dropped to the official seal on the page as she felt the twins stir in their bassinet behind her. She could almost hear Bradley's mocking laughter in her head, see his smug expression as he tried to paint her as some scheming villain. But if he thought she would back down, he didn't know her at all. Clarice receives an envelope in the mail that reads, "Summons for a paternity dispute." She clenches her fists, realizing the legal battle has only begun. Clarice lingered in Tanya's kitchen the next morning, staring at the crumpled summons in her hands. The babies napped in a portable bassinet nearby, soft coos occasionally breaking the quiet. She'd barely slept, and now her eyes traced each word on that official paper, her heart pounding with a mix of anger and hurt. Bradley was contesting paternity, just as he'd threatened. Yet seeing it in black and white brought a wave of nausea. She heard Tanya's footsteps and looked up. Her friend offered a gentle smile and set down 2 cups of coffee. "No pressure to talk yet," Tanya said softly. "But I'm here if you want to." Clarice nodded, grateful. She watched the steam curl from the mug, remembering a time when she and Bradley used to share morning coffee on the penthouse balcony. That life felt unreal now, overshadowed by betrayal and legal threats. Her phone buzzed with notifications, gossip headlines about the alleged mistress who'd tricked a wealthy CEO. The tabloids had latched onto Bradley's story, painting Clarice as some schemer. She frowned at one outrageous headline, "CEO's betrayed heart? Wife's infidelity?" It made her stomach twist. She silently vowed that no matter how vicious the rumors, she would not let lies become the truth. Later in the day, she wrestled with the twins' feeding schedule, burping them between phone calls to local legal clinics. Most turned her away, citing her complicated case or high fees. Just as she was about to lose hope, an older lawyer's name popped up. A colleague of Tanya's sister recommended him. Clarice punched in the number, praying he'd at least listen. When she arrived at his office the next day, she felt self-conscious in jeans and a wrinkled blouse while wheeling a stroller with 2 fussing infants. The lawyer, Mr. Gillis, looked older than she expected. Hair thinning, silver-rimmed glasses perched on the tip of his nose. Yet his demeanor, though brisk, held a hint of understanding. "Let's cut to the chase," Mr. Gillis said, adjusting the stack of papers in front of him. "Paternity disputes with a high-profile figure can turn into long, dirty fights. You'll need substantial evidence and an ironclad argument if you want a fair shot." Clarice swallowed hard, smoothing a hand over one baby's blanket. "I have no doubt he's the father," she insisted, "and he knows it too. He's just trying to ruin my reputation." Her words caught in her throat as the other twin started to whimper. The stress of juggling 2 newborns during a legal consult felt overwhelming. Mr. Gillis frowned. "I'll need a retainer fee," he said, quoting a figure that made Clarice's heart sink. It was a sum she simply didn't have. Seeing her reaction, he softened a bit. "I understand this is difficult. Give me a call when you secure the funds. If you do, I'd be willing to represent you." Clarice left the office deflated, wondering how she'd ever pull the money together. That night, after finally rocking the babies to sleep in Tanya's spare room, she sobbed quietly on the edge of the bed. A swirl of exhaustion, shame, and determination overwhelmed her. She had to protect her children, yet every path forward seemed blocked by Bradley's wealth and influence. 2 mornings later, she tapped her foot nervously in Mr. Gillis's waiting room, the babies parked by her chair in their stroller. She'd asked for an extension before finalizing anything, hoping to buy time. A receptionist approached. "Mr. Gillis can see you now, and, there's a note on your account." Clarice's heartbeat spiked. What kind of note? The receptionist gave her a polite, if puzzled, shrug. "It says part of your fee has been paid anonymously. That's unusual in our practice." Clarice stared, stunned. Someone had stepped in on her behalf. "Who?" she whispered, thinking of Tanya or some distant family member. but the receptionist shook her head, indicating no information was available. When she entered Mr. Gillis's office, he looked equally perplexed. "If this is legitimate, you have enough to move forward." He paused, studying her. "You'd still owe the balance at some point, but for now it puts me on retainer." Relief surged through Clarice. She couldn't afford to question this stroke of luck. Somehow she was back on track, able to challenge Bradley's claims without drowning in immediate legal costs. That evening, she sat at Tanya's tiny table, the babies gurgling in a makeshift play area on the floor. She studied the documents Mr. Gillis had prepared, filing her counterclaim to Bradley's paternity denial. Her signature trembled on the page, but the moment she finished, she felt an odd sense of triumph. He might have power and money, but she had truth on her side. In the hushed hours after midnight, Clarice found herself restless again. She opened her battered notebook to the pages where she'd outlined her business idea. Initially, it had been little more than a dream, but now she felt an urgency to make it real. She wanted an independent life, one where Bradley couldn't threaten her finances or her future. A flicker of encouragement arrived in small but touching ways over the next few days. Packages of diapers, notes of support left at Tanya's door, even groceries delivered anonymously. It felt as though someone out there believed in her and wanted her to keep going. Soon, the court set a hearing date to address the paternity dispute and the question of child support. The day Tanya read the official notice aloud, Clarice's heart hammered, partly in relief. At least there was a path forward, yet it also reminded her of the uphill battle against a powerful man who could spin the narrative however he wanted. Bradley's meddling continued unabated. Rumors spread that Clarice had entertained a mysterious lover during her marriage. One gossip site claimed the twins' father was an old friend from high school who'd reappeared in her life. Utter nonsense, but salacious enough to get clicks. Comments flooded social media with speculation about the real dad, some nasty, some pitying, most just ignorant. Between the twins' needs and the stress of potential public humiliation, Clarice felt cracks forming in her composure. She tried to bury herself in caring for her children. After all, every time she looked into their tiny faces, she felt her resolve strengthen. They were innocent in this whole mess. She refused to let them be pawns in Bradley's game. A scheduled doctor visit for the twins came at the perfect time. Clarice cradled them on the worn plastic chairs of the pediatrician's office, feeling a spark of motherly pride at their steady growth. The doctor pronounced them healthy, if a bit underweight, and gave Clarice the reassurance she so desperately needed. Holding one of the little ones up to her cheek afterward, she remembered there was more to her life than court papers and malicious gossip. The babies needed her strong, so she would be strong. Still, doubts haunted her. Late at night, she'd wander into Tanya's cramped living room and stare at the city lights beyond the windows. Could she really sustain a legal war against a man who had nearly unlimited resources? Could she endure the psychological strain of being vilified in the media? What if she lost everything? She often found herself swallowing back tears, determined not to let fear overshadow her responsibilities. On one of those sleepless nights, a call came from an unknown number. Clarice nearly ignored it, expecting more tabloid prying, but an instinct made her answer. The voice on the other end sounded both warm and familiar, though she couldn't quite place it. "I've heard about your challenges," the person said gently, "and I'd like to help you if you're willing to listen." Clarice felt her pulse quicken. "Who is this?" A light chuckle. "Someone who believes in your potential. We met a while back. Let's say I admired your intellect and drive. I've since become aware that you're starting a tech-oriented business. I'd love to discuss a possible partnership. Let's meet soon." Her mind spun with questions, yet something about the person's tone felt sincere. After they hung up, she pressed the phone to her chest, a spark of hope burning brighter. If this was a real opportunity, it might finally give her the independence she needed. A few days later, her old mentor, Someone from the business world she'd crossed paths with during a past event surfaced in person. He greeted her with a warm handshake at a small cafe. "You've been through hell," he said, sympathy coloring his voice. "But I've seen your rough sketches for a financial tech platform. You have a knack for strategy, Clarice. I'm offering my support if you want to move forward." Her eyes lit up, though she struggled to hide her lingering wariness. "A formal pitch?" "That's all I ask," he said, sipping his coffee. "Show me your plans and passion. If it makes sense, I'll help you find funding." She sat straighter, determination glowing in her chest. "I'll do it," she said, unable to keep the smile off her face. This was the break she'd hoped for, a chance to stand on her own feet. For a moment, she almost forgot the swirling chaos of Bradley's lawsuits. That night, after she tucked the babies into bed, Clarice paused at their crib, their tiny hands splayed out across soft blankets, faces relaxed. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to think beyond mere survival. She began imagining a better tomorrow. Gently brushing her fingers over their warm cheeks, she whispered, "He can fight me in court, but I won't give up." Hours later, when the apartment was dark and silent, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. She groggily reached for it, squinting at the screen. The text came from Bradley's legal team, each word cutting through her drowsiness like a blade. "Prepare your evidence. We have proof you lied." Clarice's heart pounded. What proof could they have? Clarice woke before sunrise, heart still rattled by the ominous text that had appeared on her phone late the previous night. She carefully maneuvered out of bed, trying not to wake the twins sleeping in the portable crib beside her. That single message, "We have proof you lied," roared through her thoughts. How could Bradley's lawyers have any proof of something that wasn't true? The idea both enraged and terrified her. She tiptoed into Tanya's small kitchen, switching on the overhead light. The quiet hum of the refrigerator felt strangely comforting as she stood there, phone in hand, scrolling through the mountain of headlines that had piled up overnight. The tabloids continued branding her an unfaithful wife, an ambitious nobody looking for a golden ticket. It hurt, seeing her name dragged through filth, but she clung to the knowledge that not a shred of it was true. As dawn light filtered through the window, she texted her mentor, brief and direct, asking if he could meet for coffee. She needed to finalize a pitch soon and keep her mind focused on forging her own path, rather than wallowing in these attacks. His reply came swiftly, "Of course, name the time." A few hours later, Clarice stood outside a quiet cafe downtown. Tanya had graciously agreed to babysit the twins so Clarice could focus. Her gaze drifted to the bustle of the city, people hurrying along sidewalks, lost in their own worlds. She wondered if they recognized her from the gossip columns, if they'd see her face and judge her. Her throat tightened, but she lifted her chin and pushed open the door, determined to appear calm. Her mentor waved from a small table by the window where 2 coffees waited. He wore the same thoughtful expression she remembered from old business conferences, the kind that made you believe an opportunity was around the corner if you just looked carefully enough. "You don't have to say a word," he said gently as she approached. "I know it's a terrible time, but I'm impressed by how steadfast you've been." She managed a tight smile, sinking into the chair opposite him. "I'm trying my best," she admitted. "But Bradley, he's determined to see me ruined." He slid a small packet of papers toward her, nodding for her to look. She skimmed through them, heart quickening at the promising lines of potential investment. "A few folks are interested in your tech idea," he explained. "They want a formal outline of how you'll execute the concept. If you can deliver a compelling pitch, you could secure enough funding to really start." Clarice felt a flicker of hope, the first in what felt like ages. "I'll do whatever it takes," she said softly, tapping the page. She could picture a modest office space, new laptops, a small but committed team. It was a fragile vision, but one that ignited her resolve. After discussing key points for the pitch, Her mentor lowered his voice. "Are you holding up? I've seen the headlines." She swallowed hard, recalling the vile comments, the trolls who insisted she was a con artist. "It's hard," she admitted. "The worst is that people believe him. Some of my old friends have stopped calling." A wave of sorrow flashed in her eyes, but she steadied herself. "But I'll survive. I have to." He offered her a look of admiration and concern. "You're stronger than you know," he said, "and you're not alone." She clung to those words during the taxi ride back to Tanya's apartment. On the way, she received a phone call from an unknown number. She nearly ignored it. She was getting used to random journalists fishing for a scandal. But something told her to pick up. A breathy female voice introduced herself as Leah, a junior attorney who had recently passed the bar. "I've been following your case," Leah explained, sounding almost apologetic. "I believe you've been unjustly targeted. I'm willing to help pro bono, if you'll have me." Clarice's jaw nearly dropped. "Pro bono?" she echoed, pressing the phone closer to her ear. "Why would you do that?" Leah cleared her throat. "I have reasons of my own. Let's just say your story resonates with me, and I can't stand bullies like Bradley misusing the legal system." She paused. "I might not be the most experienced lawyer out there, but I promise I'll work tirelessly for you." That spark of gratitude threatened to bring tears to Clarice's eyes. "Yes," she managed, voice trembling with relief. "I'd be more than grateful." When she returned to Tanya's place, Leah arrived shortly after, a young woman with determined eyes and an armful of bulging folders. She spoke quickly, explaining how the media narrative could be refuted in court, especially if they demonstrated Bradley's manipulative tactics. Clarice watched with silent awe as the junior attorney flipped through documents highlighting possible legal angles and urging her not to lose faith. Yet the challenges were real. Clarice's phone chirped constantly with notifications about more negative coverage. One article ran an interview with a supposed witness who claimed Clarice had been seen with another man. The story reeked of invention, but it sowed enough doubt that Clarice's stomach knotted each time she read a new paragraph. Leah put a hand on Clarice's arm. "We'll expose these lies," she insisted. "If Bradley wants to keep pushing, we'll push back with the truth." Buoyed by this new ally, Clarice began preparing in earnest for the upcoming court hearing. She spent her evenings sorting through old photos, emails, and texts to piece together a timeline that proved Bradley's paternal involvement. With each discovered piece of evidence, like an ultrasound appointment date he'd attended, or a text thread confirming the due date, she felt more confident. Meanwhile, she dove deeper into refining her startup pitch. With Tanya's spare laptop and a borrowed desk in the corner of the living room, she drafted slides that spoke to potential investors' biggest concerns: scalability, market need, and long-term growth. She learned to talk about user acquisition costs and projected profits, all while pausing every so often to change a diaper or rock a fussy baby back to sleep. The balancing act left her exhausted, but also proud of herself. Still, in the back of her mind loomed Bradley's cryptic threat about possessing proof she had lied. She kept replaying the text in her head, wondering if it was another bluff or if he'd somehow manufactured damaging evidence. On one particularly frantic morning, Clarice rushed to a coffee shop for a quiet corner to practice her pitch. She caught a glimpse of her reflection in the glass door, hair messy, dark circles under her eyes. People around her studied their laptops or scrolled through their phones with bored expressions, but she felt as if everyone could sense the whirlwind inside her. Midway through her practice session, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen. A longtime friend she hadn't heard from in months wanted to meet. Unease bloomed as she read the message. This friend used to be close to Bradley's inner circle. Perhaps now they had come fishing for information, or maybe they genuinely cared. Clarice decided to stay cautious. Too many had turned away when rumors began swirling. Later that afternoon, just as she finished reviewing court documents for the 10th time, a small group of business acquaintances called. They'd heard about her new project and invited her to present it informally over a video call. Clarice's nerves flared, but she accepted. She shut herself in Tanya's bedroom and connected her phone to a cheap tripod. The call started with 4 serious-faced participants on the screen. They asked piercing questions, occasionally interrupting each other, but seemed intrigued by Clarice's concept. By the end of the call, they hinted at potential interest in investing. She clicked off, adrenaline coursing through her veins. It felt like a breakthrough, one she desperately needed. That evening, Tanya and Clarice shared a quiet meal, the babies finally asleep. Tanya popped open a cheap bottle of sparkling cider and raised a glass. "To you," she said, smiling, "for not giving up." Clarice clinked her glass lightly. "I don't have the option to give up," she said. "If I do, Bradley wins. And my babies, they deserve better." Long after Tanya went to bed, Clarice spread out her legal paperwork once more on the kitchen table, rereading it all to anchor herself. The hearing was just around the corner. Her stomach flipped at the thought of seeing Bradley in person again, his cold stare, his smug certainty that he would prevail. She exhaled and reminded herself she was no longer alone. She had Tanya, Mr. Gillis, Leah, and her mentor, people who believed in her. Outside, the city lights glowed across an endless darkness, and the quiet calm lulled her into a momentary sense of peace. Then came a faint sound from the hallway, a soft rustling against the door. Clarice got up, heart thumping. She opened the door a crack and saw no one, just a small envelope lying on the welcome mat. She picked it up gingerly and sealed the door behind her. Her pulse climbed as she read the words on the envelope. There was no return address, no name, just her own scribbled on the front. Curious and anxious, she slid a finger under the flap, revealing an official-looking document. The first line caught her eye. Paternity test results. Her breath caught. It claimed to be the undeniable proof that Bradley was, in fact, the children's father. The data looked authentic. Dates, lab signatures, even a seal. She pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. If this was genuine, it could finally shatter Bradley's false narrative once and for all. Yet it also meant a new wave of consequences loomed. On the eve of the hearing, an envelope is slipped under Clarice's door, containing test results that could change everything. Clarice barely slept the night before the hearing. The mysterious envelope with the conclusive paternity results stayed on the small nightstand in Tanya's living room, casting an invisible weight over the entire apartment. She ran through every scenario in her head, imagining Bradley's accusations and the judge's reactions, her nerves thrumming. The babies stirred in their portable crib, prompting her to rock them back to sleep with gentle pats. Their soft breathing reminded her why she had to stand her ground. Her children deserved a mother who wouldn't back down, no matter how intimidating the fight. By dawn, she was wide awake, carefully ironing a modest blouse and skirt she hoped would convey dignity in court. She studied herself in the bathroom mirror, noticing faint circles under her eyes, remnants of countless sleepless nights. For a moment, a pang of uncertainty flickered. What if the judge believed Bradley's lies? What if the media twist the narrative again? But she pushed the doubt aside, thinking of the envelope's contents. The test results were irrefutable proof that Bradley was, in fact, the father. Tanya bustled in, balancing 2 steaming mugs of coffee and a supportive smile. "I'll watch the twins," she said, voice hushed in the early morning quiet. "Just come back here victorious." She set the mugs down, then gently squeezed Clarice's shoulder. "You've got truth on your side." Clarice nodded, grateful for the unwavering friendship. She took a steadying sip of coffee, then retrieved the envelope from the nightstand, tucking it inside a manila folder. The weight of that folder felt both terrifying and empowering. Soon she arrived at Mr. Gillis's law office, the sounds of the busy city swirling around her. The older lawyer greeted her with a curt nod and a flicker of satisfaction when he saw the folder in her arms. "I hear you've come across something vital," he said under his breath, leading her to a small conference room. Leah, the junior attorney who had volunteered to help, was already there, tapping her pen nervously on a legal pad. Clarice slid the envelope across the table. "It arrived anonymously," she explained, voice low. "But it looks legitimate. A full paternity test, complete with lab signatures and official seals." Leah lifted the document, scanning the data with trained eyes. "This is very thorough," she murmured, pausing at the final page that confirmed Bradley as the father with near absolute certainty. "If it's genuine, it'll destroy his claim that the twins aren't his." Mr. Gillis exhaled, a measured hint of relief crossing his lined face. "Then let's make sure it's introduced properly in court. Bradley's team will likely cry forgery, so we'll need the lab to verify it if necessary." Clarice swallowed, summoning her courage. "I'm ready. I just want to end these lies." They left for the courthouse together, taking separate cars so as not to attract a barrage of press. Even so, a small cluster of reporters waited on the courthouse steps, cameras already flashing. Clarice kept her gaze focused forward, shoulders squared. She could feel the buzz of speculation following her, but she refused to give them any more material. A journalist shouted a question about alleged infidelity, but she simply pushed through the doors, Mr. Gillis and Leah flanking her like guardians. Inside, the hushed echo of footsteps and murmured voices brought a fresh wave of nerves. Clarice took a seat at the plaintiff's table, exhaling slowly. The courtroom was smaller than she had imagined, but the tension thrumming in the air felt massive. Rows of onlookers drawn by Bradley's media status filled the benches. A few recognized Clarice from tabloids and whispered behind their hands. She straightened her back, refusing to cringe under the scrutiny. Then came a sudden hush as the heavy doors at the other side of the room opened. Bradley strode in with two of his attorneys. He wore a polished suit and a measured smirk, sparing Clarice no more than a dismissive glance. Her pulse quickened, recalling their last confrontation in the hospital hallway, where he had glared at her with cold indignation as she cradled the newborns. She clenched her hands in her lap, reminding herself that this time she had the advantage of truth. The judge, a stern-faced woman with sharp eyes, entered, commanding the courtroom to rise. Once everyone was seated again, the proceedings began. Clarice's attorney spoke first, outlining the fundamental facts of the dispute. Clarice had given birth to twins, Bradley publicly denied paternity, and now they needed to establish the truth for custody and child support. Bradley's lead lawyer rose next, launching into an impassioned statement that portrayed Bradley as the victim of a calculated scheme to exploit his wealth. Clarice's insides twisted at the sheer audacity. She caught glimpses of flashing cameras outside the hallway door, glimpses of onlookers straining to catch every detail. It didn't take long for Clarice to be called to testify. With a small tremor in her voice, she recounted the hospital incident, the harsh words Bradley had hurled at her just after she'd given birth, his insistence that she and the babies get out of the penthouse. The courtroom fell silent as she described how she pleaded with him to simply hold one of the newborns, how he turned away with disgust in his eyes. Her throat tightened, remembering the raw hurt of that day, but she kept her voice level. She would not let tears undermine her resolve. When Clarice mentioned the paternity test she had received anonymously, a ripple of murmurs passed through the onlookers. Leah stood, requesting permission to submit the document as evidence. The judge motioned for her to approach. Bradley's lawyers immediately objected, citing suspicion of tampering. Clarice felt her stomach knot. She had braced herself for this reaction, but seeing Bradley's smug expression twisted the knife deeper. Leah insisted the court allow the lab that supposedly issued the results to confirm or deny their authenticity. The judge, clearly irritated with the bickering lawyers, instructed an independent verification. She scheduled a brief recess while they arranged the official check. During that break, Clarice retreated to a bench in the corridor, silently clutching her folder. She glimpsed Bradley down the hallway, gesturing angrily on his phone, presumably instructing his PR team or legal aides. A chill ran down her spine when he caught her eye. The contempt in his gaze remained as strong as ever. The recess ended, and everyone filed back into the room. Within minutes, the lab's representative, appearing via remote video call, confirmed the test's authenticity. The swirl of tension in the courtroom spiked again. Bradley's lawyer fumbled for a response, scrambling to claim the timing was suspect. But the judge's expression hardened. She was clearly unimpressed by the repeated attempts to discredit legitimate proof. A low murmur spread among spectators. Clarice gripped the edge of the table, relief flooding her system in a dizzying rush. She saw subtle changes in posture from the media members present, as though they were already composing their next headlines. Bradley's paternity claims collapse in court. In a measured tone, the judge made an interim ruling that effectively recognized the children's right to financial support, pending a final decision on custody and visitation. Clarice could hardly believe it. She heard a few faint cheers from the back rows, possibly from people who felt moved by her story or outraged at Bradley's behavior. She resisted the urge to slump in relief. There was still a long road ahead. As the session adjourned, the judge gave a pointed look to both parties, reminding them that any further lies or manipulations would be dealt with severely. Then the room erupted in hushed conversation. Clarice started to gather her papers, her hands trembling from the surge of adrenaline. She felt Bradley's presence behind her before she saw him. He leaned in close enough that his words reached only her ears. "You've humiliated me today," he hissed, voice taut with quiet rage. "If you think I'll let that slide, you're sorely mistaken. You want a war? Fine, you'll get one." Clarice swallowed the knot in her throat, refusing to let her fear show. She stood straighter, feeling the stares of curious onlookers. Mr. Gillis placed a protective hand on her shoulder and subtly guided her away from Bradley's ominous presence. Stepping outside into the bright midday sun, Clarice looked up at the sky, momentarily blinded. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, but she kept her head high. A swirl of relief and dread wrestled inside her. She knew Bradley's threats weren't idle. If anything, his fury was now stoked by a public defeat. The real battle, she suspected, was only just beginning. Bradley, cornered by the court's acknowledgement of the test results, vows that if Clarice wants a war, she'll get one. Clarice exhales shakily. She knows the real battle has just begun. Clarice woke up each day now with an electric sense of urgency. The bitter memory of Bradley's threat in the courtroom still hovered in her mind, pushing her forward. She was tired of fighting battles in legal chambers and gossip columns alone. If she had to defend herself, she would do it on multiple fronts. And so she channeled her energies into the one goal that might give her a fighting chance: launching her own startup. She began in Tanya's small living room, converting the cramped corner next to the sofa into a makeshift office. The twins watched her curiously from their playpen whenever she tapped away on an old laptop, scribbling notes or pacing around while practicing her pitches. Sometimes Clarice caught herself laughing at how surreal it felt, speaking to imaginary investors in a room that smelled like baby formula and day-old coffee. But she took it seriously. She had no choice. Word of her determination spread quietly among people who sympathized with her ordeal. A handful of angel investors stepped forward, intrigued by Clarice's plan to blend emerging technology with financial services that were both accessible and transparent. Though small, these pledges of support gave her enough confidence to begin mapping out a real timeline. She formed a legal entity, printed a modest stack of business cards bearing a simple yet sleek logo, and sketched a roadmap of milestones on her bedroom wall. Yet as soon as news of her budding enterprise trickled out, Bradley struck back with the same venom he'd displayed in court. Blog posts surfaced, anonymously sourced, that questioned Clarice's ethics, painting her as a novice with delusions of grandeur. Online message boards suddenly brimmed with negative reviews of her non-existent product, and rumors ran rampant that she lacked the professional skills to manage a serious operation. The first time she noticed these attacks, her stomach knotted. She was alone in Tanya's kitchen, reading a post that called her a reckless amateur riding on scandalous publicity to snatch quick cash. She felt tears prick the corners of her eyes, partly from anger, partly from hurt. Tanya walked in at that moment, saw the screen, and let out a low whistle. "He's trying to crush you before you can even start," she said. Clarice nodded, snapping the laptop shut. "But I'm not backing down." She took a shaky breath. "I just need to show people what I can really do." And she did. She set up a series of small, private pitch meetings with local business owners, technology experts, and even a few old acquaintances from her days attending corporate events with Bradley. This time, however, she spoke with a quiet but fierce conviction fueled by the hardships she'd endured. She explained how her platform would fill a gap in the market, offering tools to individuals and small businesses that lacked resources. Some people arrived skeptical, but many left impressed. Meanwhile, Tanya became her unofficial assistant, answering emails, scheduling calls, running errands. Leah, the junior attorney who had stepped in to help with the custody case, occasionally offered legal advice on business contracts too. Together they formed a makeshift team in that tiny living room, littered with half-eaten sandwiches and the twins' toys. Despite the forward momentum, Clarice remained on high alert. She knew Bradley wasn't finished. Every few days, she'd discover a new wave of rumors on social media, accusations that her idea was a mere shell, or that she was funneling money from questionable sources. Investors asked pointed questions about these allegations, and more than one hesitated to sign deals because of the swirling negativity. One afternoon, she received a call from a local journalist who had once covered Bradley's corporate events. The reporter's voice dripped with curiosity, if not outright suspicion. "I hear you're launching a bold startup," the journalist said. "But what about these rumors linking you to fraudulent activity?" Clarice gripped her phone, turning away from Tanya, who was feeding one of the babies in the background. "They're baseless," she replied evenly, refusing to give an inch. "I welcome any scrutiny, because everything I'm doing is above board." When the piece was published, it turned out surprisingly fair, praising Clarice's resilience and highlighting her concept's potential. She felt a surge of relief, hoping this would counteract Bradley's smear campaign. That evening, a modest wave of online support rolled in, with some individuals praising her vision for financial inclusivity. A few even posted comments calling out the glaring attempts to sabotage her reputation. Still, every win seemed to bring a fresh retaliation. Bradley took to snide remarks in interviews, never mentioning Clarice by name but dropping heavy insinuations about unscrupulous operators who ride a wave of pity. Worse, some of the quiet partnerships Clarice was nurturing began to show cracks of doubt. Private messages trickled into her inbox. "We're worried about the negative press," or "Is there any chance you'll lose focus because of the paternity case?" Each time, Clarice composed a calm, professional response, though she felt her nerves fray a little more. One bright spot came a week later, when an established entrepreneur in the tech scene, someone Clarice had never met, publicly applauded her perseverance. He posted on social media that while many talk about bridging financial gaps, Clarice was actually doing it, despite her personal trials. That endorsement sent ripples through the local investment community. Over the next few days, Clarice secured a small yet vital seed round, enough to move the operation out of Tanya's cramped living room and into a shared co-working space. The new workspace, with its glass-walled meeting rooms and communal tables, felt like a breath of fresh air. Clarice set up her own corner desk, a few potted plants and a collage of notes taped to the wall. The twins spent part of the day with a kindly neighbor-turned-nanny, allowing Clarice the focus she needed to build her prototype, schedule investor calls, and refine her pitch deck. She marveled at how far she'd come in just a short time. Barely a few months ago, she was locked out of her own home, fighting for her baby's recognition. Now she was CEO of a fledgling startup, forging a path despite the storms swirling around her. Bradley, however, found new ways to interfere. He orchestrated a wave of negative user reviews of Clarice's platform. though it wasn't even publicly launched yet. Troll accounts on social media posted bizarre claims of glitchy functions and financial errors. Clarice and Leah quickly compiled evidence that these users were fraudulent, tying several suspicious accounts back to an IP address rumored to be linked to Bradley's circle. It infuriated Clarice, but she forced herself to maintain composure. She refused to stoop to his level by publicly calling him out. Instead, she prepared a neat report that documented the fabricated reviews and shared it discreetly with her core investors. One morning, she arrived at the co-working space to find local news cameras outside. The reporter waiting for her had a bright smile but a pointed question on her lips. "Any comment on the allegations that your platform is already experiencing security breaches?" Clarice blinked, heart jumping. "No breaches," she answered, managing a calm tone. "Our product is still in beta with a small group of testers. The rumors you're hearing are false." She emphasized that her legal team was looking into the issue, then excused herself and headed into the building. That night, exhausted from the constant strain, she found a moment of respite when she placed the twins in their new crib at Tanya's apartment. She gazed down at their sleepy faces, feeling the weight of the world lift ever so slightly. Whenever she felt her strength waning, their mere presence reminded her why she was fighting. She kissed their foreheads and tiptoed into the living room, finding Tanya working through a pile of unopened mail. Clarice settled into a chair, letting out a weary sigh. "I feel like I'm juggling 1,000 knives," she said. Tanya gently closed the folder in front of her. "Yeah, but you're not dropping them," she replied with a smile. "That's the difference." Clarice attempted a small laugh, but the sound caught in her throat. The memory of Bradley's last threat lingered in her mind, growing darker every time he launched a fresh attack. Still, she reminded herself that, for all his scheming, he hadn't managed to break her stride. She was forging ahead, building something real. She glanced at her phone, expecting more emails or messages from potential investors. Instead, a text appeared from an unknown number. Her eyes scanned the screen, heart pounding as she took in the words, "Watch your back. This next move from Bradley could ruin everything." Her pulse quickened as she braced for the new threat. Clarice felt the warning in that anonymous text still echoing inside her head the next morning. She stood by the window of the shared co-working space she now used as an office, watching the first rays of sunlight stretch across the city. The hum of early traffic sent a jittery energy through the streets below. She carried that same urgency in her chest, determined to stay a step ahead of Bradley's next move. Her small team trickled in around 8, greeting her with hopeful smiles. She had recently hired 2 developers who believed in her vision, both as passionate about the product as they were impressed by her steadfast resilience. The co-working area bristled with activity, other startups, creative freelancers, and entrepreneurs all hustling. Clarice took heart from that environment. She felt less alone knowing everyone there was chasing big dreams against steep odds. Before diving into work, she made a quick call to Tanya to check on the twins. They'd spent the night at Tanya's apartment, a normal arrangement now that Clarice often worked late. Hearing the babies gurgling in the background soothed her nerves. She thanked her friend once again for stepping up as an extra set of hands to help raise them. Tanya, warm as ever, merely told her to stay focused and to keep believing in what she was building. A short time later, Clarice gathered the developers in one of the co-working space's glass-walled conference rooms. Sticky notes dotted the big whiteboard along one side of the room, each scribbled with features they needed to refine, potential partner companies or investor leads. The developers rattled off their progress, explaining how they'd made the prototype more user-friendly overnight. She nodded and suggested improvements in design and overall flow, drawing on her own experience in finance. Just as they were wrapping up, one of her developers tapped his phone screen. "Did you see this?" he asked, eyes slightly wide. A new blog post had appeared, claiming Clarice's financial platform was teetering on the edge of collapse, and that investors were fleeing left and right. Clarice's gut twisted at the falsehood. Her team glowered at the blatant smear, but she calmly told them to keep forging ahead. She would handle the rumors with facts and results, not by stooping to speculation. After the meeting, she retreated to her desk, pulling up her pitch deck. She had an important call that afternoon with a major international consortium that could catapult her company to the next stage. If it went well, she'd not only secure funding but also begin establishing global connections, exactly what she needed to outgrow Bradley's destructive influence. Leah, the junior attorney helping with her custody case, arrived midday. Carrying a few manila folders, she signaled for Clarice to step into a quieter corner of the lounge. "We need to talk," Leah said in a lowered voice. "Bradley's team filed another motion claiming your current funds might be coming from questionable sources." She let out an exasperated sigh. "He's trying to paint you as unethical in business to undermine your credibility in the custody battle." Clarice's jaw tightened. "It's never enough for him, is it?" She glanced around, noticing a few curious heads turning their way. Steering Leah to an empty break room, she closed the door behind them. "We're fully transparent about every investment, every contract," she said. "What does he hope to achieve?" Leah placed the folders on a small table, giving Clarice a concerned look. "He wants to sabotage you any way he can. If your business crashes, he might reassert control over the narrative, paint you as unstable, incapable, or an unfit parent." The words stung, but Clarice forced calm into her voice. "He's already tried lies, defamation, and intimidation. I'm not folding." Leah offered a small nod of respect. "That's what I wanted to hear. By the way, I reached out to a contact in corporate law who might help you structure your investor agreements so they're beyond reproach. We can't leave any cracks for Bradley to exploit." Clarice thanked her, grateful for the support. Once Leah left, she realized she had exactly 10 minutes before her pivotal call. She rushed to her desk, heart hammering at the thought that this conversation could open the door to an international partnership. Smoothing down her blazer, she took a deep, centering breath, then dialed in. Faces popped up on her screen, executives from a European-based tech conglomerate who greeted her politely. In measured tones, Clarice explained how her platform could simplify financial access for everyday people and small businesses, outlining how it might integrate with their global reach. She showed her screen, flipping through slides that detailed user interface concepts, security measures, and potential ROI. Their eyes flickered with interest, and she sensed they were taking her seriously. Near the end of the call, one executive asked if the media controversies she was facing might derail her focus. Clarice swallowed a spike of anxiety, but calmly answered that her mission stood on solid, genuine ground. These controversies were mere distractions she was determined to overcome. She ended with a passionate point. The product would speak for itself, and her personal trials had only hardened her resolve to succeed. She watched their subtle nods, saw their postures relax. She hoped that meant confidence, or at least curiosity, to move forward. No sooner had she clicked off than her phone lit up with a message from her mentor. "We need to chat. Good news," it read. Clarice grabbed a water bottle and hurried to call him back. His voice crackled with an undercurrent of excitement as he explained that the consortium had given strong signals of interest. "Nothing is final, but it's a step in the right direction," he said warmly, congratulating her on a solid pitch. For a brief moment, Clarice allowed herself a grin, imagining how securing a significant international deal could not only propel her startup, but also put Bradley's negativity in the shadows. If her success grew too big to dismiss, his attempts to undermine her might start looking desperate, even to his own allies. That evening, she arranged for Tanya and the babies to meet her at a small restaurant near the co-working space. She wanted a few hours away from the fluorescent lights and swirling gossip. Tanya arrived with the twins fussing, still adjusting to the hustle of city traffic, and they tucked themselves into a cozy corner booth. The babies settled once they were in Clarice's arms, lulled by the dim lighting and soft hum of conversation around them. Over dinner, Clarice confided in Tanya about the potential global partnership, allowing herself a moment of cautious optimism. Tanya clapped her hands in delight. "Finally, some recognition for all you've done," she said. "Let this be your big break." Clarice smiled, though worry lingered behind her eyes. "I just hope Bradley doesn't find a way to torpedo this too. His reach seems endless sometimes." Her friend's expression turned serious. "You don't need him overshadowing everything. Focus on what you can control, build your company, care for your babies, and let the truth about Bradley come to light when it's time." Clarice nodded, a spark in her chest reminding her how vital it was to stay proactive. She gazed down at her children, who were now dozing in their stroller, tiny eyelids fluttering. This was who she was fighting for, more than anything else. She would not let Bradley's obsession with power poison their lives. But the respite was short-lived. The next day at the co-working space, she discovered that Bradley had maneuvered behind the scenes to block her acquisition of a small tech firm she'd been eyeing, a key piece in her platform's expansion strategy. One of her leads, a valuable advisor in the industry, called her in a worried voice. "He's been making phone calls, pulling favors. The seller is hesitating." Clarice felt her face redden. She ended the call, heart pounding in frustration, but also determination. Another test of her mettle. She gathered her team in the conference room, explaining the development. "We'll find another route," she told them, voice steady. "He can put obstacles in front of us, but he can't stop us from creating a great product." That evening, she attended a gala organized by one of the top tech associations in town. Despite how tired she felt, she knew she had to maintain visibility. The event was grand, a lavish ballroom filled with the city's biggest innovators and investors, glittering chandeliers reflecting across polished floors. Clarice weaved through the crowd, exchanging polite greetings and handing out a few business cards. She spoke about the potential of her startup, hoping to spark enough curiosity to overshadow the rumors. And then she saw him. Bradley, near the bar, chatting with a circle of well-dressed executives. He appeared at ease, sipping an expensive-looking drink. When he spotted Clarice, his eyes flickered with an emotion somewhere between irritation and challenge. She braced herself, half expecting him to stroll over and start belittling her publicly. But for a while, he pretended not to notice her. Later in the evening, as she chatted with a possible partner, Bradley seemed to materialize by her shoulder. She felt his gaze burning into her back. Excusing herself, she turned to face him. He smiled coldly, swirling the ice in his glass. "Impressive how far you've come, Clarice," he said, voice dripping with sarcasm. "But watch your footing. You're playing in a league far above your station now." She squared her shoulders. "I'm exactly where I need to be." He shrugged with feigned indifference. "We'll see." Then he strolled away, leaving her with a bitter taste in her mouth. She noticed some watchers exchanging glances, likely aware of the tension. She took a moment to regain her composure, lifting her chin. She had no intention of letting him spoil her evening or her progress. Near the end of the gala, a fellow entrepreneur slid up beside her and discreetly passed a thin folder into her hand. "I don't like what Bradley's been doing," the man whispered. "Figured you should have this. Keep it quiet until you know what to do with it." Then he disappeared into the crowd. Curiosity burned in Clarice's chest. She thanked a few remaining contacts, slipped out to the corridor, and opened the folder under the muted glow of a wall sconce. Pages upon pages of documents detailed suspicious transactions linked to Bradley's main corporation, shell companies, questionable invoice trails, manipulated financial statements. For a moment, her breath caught. If any of this was legitimate, it was more than rumor. It was proof he'd been dealing in corporate fraud, possibly for years. She pressed the folder against her chest, heat lighting up her cheeks. Suddenly, the entire scope of Bradley's attempts to silence her made sense. He'd built his empire on rotten foundations and couldn't afford to be exposed. She could see the path forward, clear as day. All his attempts to sabotage her, to break her spirit. It was to protect this hidden wrongdoing. Clarice discovers a paper trail linking Bradley to corporate fraud. Eyes blazing, she decides it's time to bring his skeletons out into the open. Clarice spent the morning poring over the documents she had received at the gala, her heart pounding every time she turned a page. Everything in that mysterious folder pointed to one undeniable truth. Bradley had orchestrated fraudulent dealings in his company for years. Shell accounts, false invoices, and carefully laundered funds. It was bigger than she'd imagined, revealing not just unethical practices, but potentially criminal ones. Small wonder he'd fought so viciously to keep her under his control. If she exposed him, his world could collapse like a house of cards. By mid-afternoon, she pushed aside the papers and exhaled, running a hand over her tired eyes. The co-working space buzzed around her with half a dozen other startups chattering about ideas and deadlines. Her own team was in another corner, testing the latest version of their platform. She glanced over, feeling a mix of pride in their progress and a fierce need to protect them from Bradley's sabotage. She knew she couldn't keep this discovery to herself for long. He was crossing lines that could ruin people's lives. She gathered her nerve and pulled out her phone. Her old mentor answered on the second ring. Without wasting breath, Clarice explained what she'd found and why it changed everything. There was a moment of stunned silence on his end. "You need to be careful," he said at last. "Bradley is dangerous. If he catches wind that you have proof of his fraud, he'll stop at nothing to silence you." Clarice gazed at the papers fanned out across her desk, remembering all the harm Bradley had already done, locking her out of her home, denying his children, tarnishing her reputation. She swallowed hard. "I know," she replied, "but this can't stay hidden. I'm done living in his shadow." That night she met with Leah in a quiet cafe, away from prying eyes. A single lamp lit their booth, and the hum of low conversation provided some cover. Clarice showed her the documents, keeping her voice hushed as she laid out each piece of evidence. "This is serious," Leah whispered, scanning the damning numbers and false company ledgers. "But do you want to go public with this? The moment he suspects you have it, he'll try to bury you." Clarice tapped a figure that linked one of Bradley's shell accounts to a major deal that had cost hundreds of employees their jobs. "I can't walk away from this," she said, anger tinging her voice. People were hurt by his greed, investors who trusted him, workers who lost everything. Leah regarded Clarice for a long moment, then nodded. "We'll need an airtight plan, though. If this goes to the authorities or the press, we must ensure the evidence is watertight. And you should think about how you want to use it. A public reveal at the wrong time could backfire if he claims it's forged." Clarice sighed, feeling the heavy weight of responsibility. "I know. But if I don't act, he'll keep terrorizing me and everyone else." While they strategized, Clarice's phone buzzed with a notification. Her team reminded her about the upcoming Tech Summit, a high-profile corporate event where major CEOs, entrepreneurs, and investors would gather. Rumor had it that Bradley would be there too, desperate to salvage his image. A chill of determination seized her. The timing felt fateful. If done right, she could expose him before the very crowd that mattered most to his standing. It was risky, but she sensed an opening. In the days leading up to the summit, Clarice worked tirelessly. She refined her startup's presentation and made discreet calls to a couple of influential journalists she could trust. She didn't show them the entire scope of Bradley's fraud, only enough to pique their interest. If she revealed all, word might leak back to him too soon. She also reached out to a forensic accountant, ensuring that the documents she held weren't just suspicious, but provably incriminating. At last, the day arrived. The Tech Summit took place in a sprawling convention center with wide glass windows that reflected the city skyline. Clarice, dressed in a crisp blazer and a calm expression, navigated the throngs of attendees. Bold banners advertised the latest in artificial intelligence, financial technology, and cutting-edge hardware. Her chest fluttered with nerves, but her steps stayed steady. Her own booth was modest, tucked in between two larger displays boasting futuristic gadgets. Still, a small circle of curious visitors gathered around to hear about her platform's mission: financial accessibility for all, powered by intuitive design. She spoke passionately, only occasionally glancing over her shoulder, half expecting Bradley to appear with an arrogant smirk. A short while later, a hush rippled through the crowd. Clarice turned to see that Bradley had indeed arrived. He wore a tailored suit, greeting onlookers with that polished charm she once found so captivating. Now, it made her skin crawl. She watched him glide from booth to booth, shaking hands, quietly assessing. His cold eyes found hers across the room, narrowing slightly. She refused to look away. By evening, a keynote presentation took center stage in a grand hall. The entire summit audience packed rows of seats, while major industry leaders filed onto the stage for a panel discussion on market trends and corporate responsibility. Clarice slipped into one of the front rows, heart pounding. Bradley took his seat on stage, flanked by a couple of other CEOs. The moderator introduced each with lavish praise, saving Bradley for last, praising his long track record of success. Clarice's stomach knotted at the irony of it, but instead of trembling, she felt the righteous anger that had fueled her for months. She had the power to change this false narrative. When the panel discussion opened for questions, Clarice rose from her seat, stepping to a microphone set up in the aisle. The spotlight caught her face and a murmur rippled through the crowd. Her story had circulated enough that many recognized her. She saw Bradley's jaw tighten. He knew she wasn't there to toss him a softball question. With measured calm, she asked about corporate ethics and the responsibility major CEOs hold toward their investors, employees, and the public. Her eyes fixed on Bradley, who tried to maintain a genial expression. Then she referenced a specific deal that, according to the documents in her possession, Bradley had manipulated for personal gain. The question rang out in the hushed hall. Could you explain how your company justifies its reported losses when evidence suggests a hidden financial funnel? Bradley's face paled. The other panelists exchanged uneasy glances. A few cameras pivoted to catch his reaction. The moderator shifted uncomfortably, sensing tension. "I'm not sure I follow," Bradley replied, voice clipped. "We've been transparent with every transaction." Clarice pressed on, describing, without revealing every detail, how certain shell accounts seemed tied to Bradley's firm. She ended with, "Would you be willing to address these numbers here and now?" The hall erupted in a wave of whispers. Journalists lifted their phones, live streaming or furiously typing out notes. Bradley's composure faltered. He stammered about misunderstandings and misleading figures, his voice rising in an attempt to dismiss her as an angry ex-wife. She stood firm, refusing to be silenced. Anger flickered in his eyes. "This is a personal vendetta," he snapped, turning to the crowd. "She's known for making baseless accusations." People in the audience shifted, uncertain. Yet Clarice didn't back down. With a calm that belied her pounding heart, she produced a single sheet from her jacket pocket, just enough to show the panel and, by extension, the cameras, that there were indeed questionable financial transfers. She didn't lay out every page of incriminating evidence, but the implication was clear. There was more, much more. Gasps rippled across the auditorium. Bradley rose halfway from his seat, fists clenching. The moderator tried to regain order, but the tension had escalated to a fever pitch. Clarice's voice remained steady. "You can call it personal, but the numbers speak for themselves." Bradley pointed an accusing finger at her, launching into personal attacks that sounded shrill and defensive. He labeled her a gold digger, a fraud, a vengeful ex, but the more he ranted, the more unhinged he seemed in front of the poised executives and curious media. Nearby CEOs exchanged uneasy looks, distancing themselves from his outburst. Attendees murmured that he was displaying an unsettling lack of professionalism. Clarice sensed a subtle shift in the crowd's sympathy. The CEO who once stood as an untouchable figure now appeared desperate, even cornered. Security personnel hovered by the stage, glancing between Bradley and Clarice. She forced herself not to flinch under his furious stare. Months of heartbreak and betrayal burned in her memory, fueling her unwavering stance. She had finally confronted him, and in a room full of the very people whose respect he craved. Clarice slowly tucked the document back into her pocket. "I'm not here to fight you in public," she said softly, "but I won't stand by while you hide the truth." He gave a snarl of contempt, but his eyes flickered with the slightest sign of fear. The audience was no longer on his side. He seemed to realize that the more he tried to silence her, the worse he looked. After the panel ended in disarray, the tension in the auditorium remained thick. Clarice stood outside in the lobby, a small circle of reporters pressing her for details. She offered measured statements, explaining she had evidence but would let the proper authorities verify it. Then she glimpsed Bradley stalking out from a side door, glaring at her, his face red with a mix of rage and panic. Someone in the crowd whispered, "I think his empire might be in trouble," and Clarice felt a surge of relief. Yet she also knew this was only a battle won, not the entire war. Bradley's hold on his company and his wealth was slipping, but he remained formidable. If he had any moves left, he would surely play them now. Tempers flare to the point that hotel security intervenes, ensuring no physical altercation happens. Clarice holds her own, exposing enough evidence to make Bradley look guilty without revealing all her cards. The onlookers sense a major shift in power, yet as she leaves, she realizes he'll become her fiercest rival, desperate to crush her before she can bring him down. A rival CEO sidles up and whispers, "Bradley's company is in trouble. He's desperate. Watch out, or he'll come after you with everything he has left." Clarice stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of her modest new office, the city lights twinkling like distant promises. The words of that rival CEO from the gala still rang in her ears. Bradley was desperate, and she'd better brace herself. She sensed it was only a matter of time before he lashed out again, doubling down on his threats. Outside, the sky had turned a smoky violet, but she could see her own reflection in the glass, shoulders squared, jaw set in fierce resolve. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Another lawsuit, this time claiming defamation. She scrolled through the dense legal text and shook her head in frustration. Bradley was pelting her with these suits, hoping to bury her in paperwork and court dates, chipping away at her time and resources. She clenched the phone in her hand. No matter what he threw at her, she refused to break. She'd come too far to buckle under pressure now. At dawn the next day, Clarice arrived at the co-working space, only to discover that new allegations had sprouted online, this time accusing her of harsh working conditions within her fledgling startup. The notion was laughable, but her stomach sank. Even ridiculous rumors could scare investors or partners if repeated often enough. She quietly reassured her team and urged them to keep forging ahead. One developer gave her a solemn nod, promising not to let these distractions slow their progress. Despite the swirling negativity, Clarice felt proud to have people who believed in her mission. She locked herself in a small conference room and dialed Leah, the junior attorney who'd been a steadfast ally. Leah answered on the second ring, her voice already lined with tension. "He's thrown 4 new suits your way this week," Leah informed her, rustling papers in the background. "We can fight them, but it'll cost time and money. He wants to grind you down, make you too exhausted to keep exposing him." Clarice stared at the spiral-bound notebook on the table, where she'd meticulously listed every lawsuit, rumor, and slanderous article. She exhaled. "Let him try," she said. "I'm not folding." Leah paused. "I also heard from a contact on Bradley's board of directors. Things aren't looking good for him internally. His shareholders are starting to question his leadership." That news sent a small thrill through Clarice. It meant her revelations from the gala had drawn real blood. but she also knew a wounded beast was most dangerous when cornered. "He'll pull out all the stops," she replied grimly. Her suspicions proved right. Within days, Bradley's legal team hammered her with letters alleging that Clarice's small but growing enterprise was violating trade secrets, claims as baseless as they were aggressive. Investors called nervously, asking if the negative press and ceaseless attacks would derail her product launch. She could hear the worry in their voices, the subtext that if she didn't neutralize Bradley soon, her dream could collapse under the weight of scandal. Even Tanya's cozy apartment, which Clarice still treated as her second home, began to feel like a fortress under siege. One evening, the twins were in their crib, blissfully unaware of the storm raging around them, while Clarice and Tanya slumped at the kitchen table. Newspaper clippings, legal documents, and sticky notes covered every inch of the surface. Tanya clicked her tongue. "This is madness," she said, shaking her head at the threatening letters from Bradley's lawyers. "Can't he see how much harm he's doing?" Clarice's gaze flicked to her sleeping children in the next room. "He doesn't care," she whispered. "All he sees is power slipping through his fingers." Tanya set a warm hand on her arm. "I'm here, whatever you need. Don't forget that." As she trudged back to her office the following morning, Clarice received a call from her mentor. His voice was laced with concern. "You need a decisive move. This back and forth could drag on for years." Her mentor paused, then asked quietly, "Have you considered acquiring his company before he tears down yours?" Clarice's stomach flipped. The thought had crossed her mind, but it always felt like a last resort, morally dicey. It would mean forcing Bradley out of his own empire, taking over everything he'd built, no matter how corrupt it might be. The idea sat heavily on her conscience, yet she couldn't deny the logic. If she didn't act, he might succeed in destroying her startup with endless sabotage. That same day, she gathered her closest allies, Leah, Tanya, her mentor, and a couple of key investors, at her co-working space. They crammed into a glass-walled meeting room, the normally vibrant atmosphere subdued by the gravity of their discussion. Folders and laptops cluttered the small table, while outside the door, curious co-workers stole glances, sensing something critical was unfolding. "I never wanted a hostile buyout," Clarice said, voice trembling with mixed feelings. "But if I don't neutralize him, he'll drag us into court battles until we're bankrupt. And with the evidence of his fraud, we can force the board's hand." Leah nodded, adjusting her glasses. "A takeover is bold," she acknowledged. "But it could stop his attacks cold. You'd assume his client base, his resources, and you could clean house." Tanya looked pained. "It means taking everything from him. Are you ready for that?" Clarice gazed down at her knotted fingers. "He's threatened my children's future. He's tried to ruin me at every turn. I hate the idea of stooping to his level, but I can't let him crush what I'm building. I won't." Her mentor flipped open a binder. "We've talked to a few big players on Bradley's board. They might be willing to sell their shares given the damage to his reputation. You just need enough capital to make a legitimate offer." Clarice's mind reeled. Where do I find that kind of money? Even if they're selling at a discount, his company isn't cheap. One of her key investors, a gray-haired woman with kind eyes, spoke up. "We've lined up a coalition of backers who trust you, Clarice. Believe in your integrity more than Bradley's. It's risky, but they're ready if you are." A hush settled in the room. She recognized the magnitude of the choice before her. Buying out Bradley's empire wasn't just a business move. It was a direct strike that would end him as a threat. But it could also mean stepping onto a bigger, more treacherous stage. She took a steady breath, recalling all the nights she'd cried, locked out of her own home after giving birth, remembering the day he tried to deny his own children, the vicious lies he spread. Her anger flared again. If this was the only way to ensure her kids had a secure future, and that justice was served, then so be it. "I'll do it," she said firmly, her voice trembling just a fraction. "Let's move forward." After that meeting, the days blurred. Clarice juggled conference calls with potential investors, prepared legal paperwork with Leah's help, and quietly reached out to Bradley's board members who were tired of his scandal. She found them more receptive than she'd expected. Apparently, they'd been alarmed by the swirl of negative publicity, and her revelations of fraud had rattled their confidence in their CEO. Still, it was a race against time. Every day brought new intimidation tactics from Bradley's camp. Ominous letters, rumors about Clarissa's supposed violent temper, even thinly veiled threats that she might lose custody of the twins. She woke up each morning with a knot in her stomach, unsure what new crisis might erupt. Despite it all, her startup continued to gain traction. The product's beta launch went smoothly, and press coverage pivoted from scandal to curiosity. Could Clarissa's rising tech star overshadow her powerful ex? Investors who once hesitated now inched back, intrigued by her resilience. She felt a swell of pride at how her team kept forging ahead, united by a vision of innovation that soared above the ugly fight on the sidelines. Late one night, she sat alone in the empty co-working lounge, finalizing documents for the takeover. Rows of overhead lights buzzed softly, and the city sprawled outside the windows. She sipped cold coffee, exhaustion tugging at her eyes, but adrenaline kept her upright. This was it, the final push that could topple Bradley's fortress of lies and secure her path forward. Her phone rang, startling her. The screen showed an investor's name, one who'd been instrumental in piecing together the funding. She answered, heart pounding in her ears. "Clarisse," said the investor, voice tinged with cautious optimism. "We've just heard from the board. They're ready to sell. All we need is your signature tomorrow morning." She closed her eyes, relief and fear mingling. "So that's it?" she asked quietly. "We're really doing this, only if you want to," the investor replied. "But there's no time to hesitate. Bradley's empire could be yours by noon." Clarisse lowered the phone, letting the weight of that statement settle on her. A surge of protectiveness flared in her chest, protectiveness for her twins, for the people hurt by Bradley's schemes, for her own battered spirit. She imagined stepping into his corporate offices as CEO, determined to sweep out every lie and injustice he'd created. Clenching her jaw, she lifted the phone to her ear again. "I'll be there," she said. "Send me the final papers." She hung up and gazed at the city skyline, heart throbbing in a heady mix of triumph and trepidation. Tomorrow morning, she would face the choice head-on, to sign and bring Bradley's reign to an end, or to walk away and risk losing everything she'd fought for. The stakes had never been higher, yet somewhere deep inside, she knew the path she would choose. Late at night, an investor calls. "The board's ready to sell. All we need is your signature tomorrow morning." Clarisse locks her jaw, knowing she's about to stand on the brink of victory, or catastrophe. Clarisse stood outside the sprawling glass building at precisely 8 in the morning, clutching a slim leather folder against her chest. The city's rush-hour energy spun around her, car horns, hurried footsteps, the din of countless phones ringing, but she registered none of it. Today was the culmination of every battle she'd fought since the moment Bradley abandoned her in that hospital. Her pulse hammered against her ribcage. If she signed these documents, she would own his company outright. She would become CEO of a conglomerate that once loomed over her, threatening her future and her children's sense of security. Drawing a steadying breath, she entered the lobby. Polished marble floors reflected the building's modern lines, and a scattering of employees eyed her curiously. Some recognized her, the woman rumored to be locked in a vicious feud with their current boss. Others only saw a determined figure in a tailored suit, stride resolute as she approached the reception desk. A middle-aged receptionist stood from behind her station, gesturing toward a row of elevators. No words were exchanged. Clearly, Clarisse was expected. When she stepped out onto the executive floor, 2 familiar faces waited, her mentor and Leah, the junior attorney who had become a vital ally. Their eyes flickered with relief to see she'd arrived. Leah pressed a final stack of papers into Clarisse's hands, voice hushed. "This is everything. Once you sign, you'll be the majority owner. No going back." Clarice held her friend's gaze, mustering a confident nod. "I'm ready," she said, though her heart still pounded. Her mentor placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. He'd seen her evolve from a humiliated young mother into a formidable entrepreneur. Now the final step lay just a few rooms away. The boardroom door stood slightly ajar, revealing the polished table beyond. Clarice glanced at Leah, who returned an encouraging smile. Together, they entered. About half a dozen people in suits sat around the gleaming surface, shifting uncomfortably at Clarice's arrival. She recognized some, key board members, previously loyal to Bradley, now visibly uneasy. They had agreed to this meeting behind Bradley's back, startled by revelations of financial misconduct and fed up with watching their company swirl into chaos. One tall, thin man cleared his throat, inviting Clarice to take a seat at the head of the table. A faint breeze of tension passed among them. Everyone sensed the momentousness of this decision. No one looked entirely comfortable with the scenario, but their eyes also held a glimmer of respect for the young woman who had forced them to confront a toxic reality. A small conference speakerphone sat in the middle of the table, indicating that a few out-of-town members were dialed in. Soft greetings crackled over the line. Leah opened the folder and slid the documents toward Clarice. "They're ready for the purchase," she murmured, tapping the signature lines. Clarice inhaled, poised her pen, and began signing with smooth strokes. Each loop and dot felt like an act of defiance against the man who'd once vowed to destroy her. In less than a minute, she had finalized the deal. A hush held the room. The man nearest her coughed quietly and stood. "Congratulations," he said, extending his hand. "You are now the majority shareholder, the new CEO if you so choose." The rest of the board murmured assent, a low tide of approval. Clarice felt an almost dizzying sense of validation. She wasn't just fighting off an attacker anymore, she had claimed his territory, determined to rebuild it with honesty and vision. Leah gave her a discreet thumbs up, eyes shining. But before Clarice could utter a word, an unmistakable voice sliced through the heavy air. "Congratulations!" Bradley spat from the doorway, his tone brimming with sarcasm. A hush fell over the room as everyone turned. There he stood, impeccably dressed as ever, but the tension in his posture betrayed his fury. Clearly, no one had expected him so soon. Clarice rose from her seat. The board members looked stricken, too aware that the man who'd steered them for years was now overshadowed by someone he had tried to ruin. Bradley's cold gaze flicked to the folder on the table, then settled on Clarice. "So this is how it ends?" he asked, voice cutting. "You slither in behind my back? My own board sides with you?" One of the older directors shifted in his seat, cheeks flushed. "Bradley," he ventured, "we've lost confidence in your leadership. There have been too many scandals. We believe Clarice has a more stable vision for the future." Bradley let out a cold laugh. "Stable vision? You mean revenge? She's been playing the victim all along, feeding you sob stories so she could slither into my seat." His words dripped with bitterness, but Clarice also caught a subtle quiver in his voice. It was the tone of a man who'd just lost everything. Her heart hammered, but she forced herself to speak calmly. "I never wanted this, Bradley, but you left me no choice. You tried to crush everything I built, threatened my children, and lied about your crimes. Enough is enough." He stared at her, lips pressed thin. Then, in a move that stunned the room, he took a step closer, lowering his voice. "You've proven your point," he said, a hint of desperation surfacing. "You've humiliated me, but think about our kids. Don't let them grow up hating their father." His tone wavered, threading some strange mix of plea and manipulation. Clarice felt the boardroom fade into a blur. She remembered the day she stood in the hospital, babies in her arms, while he refused to acknowledge them. She remembered the gossip that painted her as an unfaithful wife, the relentless lawsuits, and the sabotage attempts. She recalled the heartbreak of discovering a man she loved was capable of such cruelty. "I wanted them to have a father," she said, voice quiet, "but not like this. You've proven time and again that you only care about power and appearances." She swallowed the lump in her throat. A family is built on love, not control. Bradley's eyes flickered with something like remorse, but a bitter sneer curled his lip. "Fine," he muttered, stepping back. "If you want to run this place, good luck. You'll see it's not as simple as throwing around accusations." He turned on his heel, storming out with shoulders hunched in defeat. The board members, stunned, exhaled in unison. Clarice let out a slow breath, meeting Leah's gaze across the table. She wasn't triumphant so much as exhausted, yet beneath that weariness, a surge of resolve carried her forward. The battle was over, but now she faced the demands of leading a major corporation tainted by scandal. She would do it her way, with integrity. In the hallway, employees gathered, whispering behind hands. Word had spread that something monumental happened. Bradley was out. Clarice was in. She glimpsed fear, surprise, even flickers of hope in their faces. Stepping past them, she made her way to the office once reserved for the CEO. It was all glass walls and sweeping city views, symbolic of the power that had hovered over her life. She'd been in this building before, trembling as an unwelcome visitor. Now, she was here on her own terms. The rest of the day felt like a whirlwind, signing transition documents, meeting department heads, forging a plan to address the company's battered public image. A flurry of messages lit her phone, journalists hungry for statements, investors seeking clarity, and friends offering heartfelt congratulations. She even received a cryptic email from a longtime board member revealing something she'd long suspected. He had been her anonymous investor, funneling resources to help her fight Bradley. He had seen her strength long before the rest of the world did. Late into the evening, she finally stepped away from the frenzy, heading down to Tanya's apartment. The twins, already dozing, stirred as she approached their crib. She gently stroked their cheeks, feeling overwhelming love. The knowledge that she'd secured a safer future for them now burned brightly in her chest. The next morning, Clarice held a press conference in the building's polished lobby. Cameras lined up in neat rows, microphones angled to catch her every word. She had one simple goal: lay everything out openly. Bradley's fraud, her own takeover, and a promise to rebuild from the ground up. Journalists fired questions. Are you seeking vengeance? Can you handle such a large conglomerate? What's next for Bradley? Clarice answered calmly, her voice threaded with unwavering conviction. I'm here to set the record straight and steer this company toward honesty and respect. When the final question trailed off, she paused, scanning the sea of cameras. She thought of the heartbreak and hurdles she'd endured, locked out of her home, ridiculed in the media, forced to prove her children's right to a father's name. Now she stood on the other side, not broken, but forged anew. She took a measured breath and spoke directly to the reporters, her voice warm yet firm, as if addressing each person individually. I am Clarice, she said, her words carrying to the far edges of the hushed lobby. I'm a proud woman of color, and I'm the mother of 2 children who have shown me more courage than I ever thought possible. Yes, we are the face of a new empire. The cameras clicked like a chorus, capturing her steady gaze. A wave of silence washed over the crowd, as though they were witnessing not just the end of a story, but the birth of something larger. She felt Bradley's absence keenly. He had chosen not to appear, unwilling to face this final moment of accountability. And that, too, spoke volumes. At last, security guided the press toward the exit. Clarice remained behind, letting the significance of it all settle in. She glanced through the glass walls at the city beyond, feeling both a sense of closure and the start of an even greater responsibility. No matter what came next, she would face it with the same determination that had carried her this far. Bradley, financially ruined, seeks forgiveness or reconciliation with Clarice and the children, but she makes it clear that true family is the one that loves without prejudice and that his time has passed. Clarice, in front of the cameras, smiles and says, "My name is Clarice. I am mixed race. I am the mother of 2 children as brave as I am. And yes, we are the face of a new empire." If you enjoyed this story, don't miss the next one. Just click on the screen.